got caught with that really heavy snowfall that the Pacific Northwest and northern Utah, southern Idaho, and western Wyoming got. So in those two places, I'm going to highlight a few reductions well, actually kind of massive reductions in some licenses. In Gunnison, we are recommending reducing licenses from buck licenses from 1,600, this is the whole basin combined, to 645, which is a 60% reduction, or a reduction of 955. And in the 3 DAUs, that's from 49% to 73% reduction in buck licenses. And for doe licenses, we're recommending reducing all the public land doe licenses in Gunnison Basin to the 10 per hunt code minimum, which is an 80% reduction. And I want to emphasize again that both of those reductions are necessary to keep, to manage to both population objective and buck-doe ratio objectives in the Gunnison Basin. And then in D2, which is right here, which is also our largest deer herd in the state at 33,000, we were at 23 bucks per 100 does before 2007. So we're 10 bucks per 100 does higher now than we were before the bad winter of 07. So those licenses are designed to manage that herd buck-doe ratio to objective. And we do these post-hunt flights every year, and why we every year, and I fully expect in a couple years we may see some reductions back population objective now. Even though it's the largest herd in the state, it still has an objective, and now with these two tougher winters we're below objective. So we're recommending reducing licenses to the minimum, doe licenses to the minimum of 10 per hunt code. So we're going up 232 buck licenses, but reducing doe licenses to the minimum of 10 per hunt code, which is a reduction of 611 and a reduction of 79%. Excuse me, too many numbers. So this slide shows the statewide average of post-hunt buck-doe ratios. And you can see the blue line here. The blue line is the average of the statewide DAU plan buck-doe ratios, which is 30. And the orange line is our statewide average of all 55 deer herds. And you can see the mild winters of 2012, 13, and 14 really allowed these buck-doe ratios to creep up on us to the peak of 38 last year. This year we classified 35 bucks per 100 does post-hunt. During the post-hunt flights we classified 76,000 deer. So I want to emphasize the sample size there is significant. And so this reduction in buck-doe ratio here statewide is a combination of both tougher winters the last 2 years and an increase in buck licenses by 5,700 or 5% last year. I would like to also mention our fawn-doe ratios are down a couple fawns per 100, down from 56 last year statewide to 54, and that definitely adds up with a large deer population. So this figure is of our 5 intensive mule deer monitoring areas, and those areas are D7 White River, D9 Middle Park, D16 is the Upper Arkansas, the 3 DAUs in the Gunnison Basin here in orange, and the Uncompahgre Plateau, D19. In those areas we annually monitor over 1,000 radio-collared mule deer, and what that allows us to do is use those survival rate. The main objective of the collared deer is to estimate survival, which we use in our population models, and it does allow us to have essentially a real-time measure of survival up into license setting, up until we recommend these licenses to you. And the survival rates this last winter in general, with the exception of Gunnison, which of course was very bad and has very low fawn survival, down closer to 20-30%. Middle Park had very high fawn survival, or very high survival all around, above average. D7, where Darby Finley is the biologist, that's about average, adult and fawn survival, and the other 2 monitoring areas are about average. One point of information that I wanted to just sort of pass on to you guys is we are going to a mandatory CWD testing at least a portion of, if not all of the harvested bucks in 6 herds in the state for the 2017 season. That's to get better estimates of CWD prevalence, to evaluate that prevalence as far as it relates to management. So to conclude on deer, we have excellent deer data, and I just gave you the 30,000 foot view on that, but we have excellent deer data to make these management recommendations. And as you can see, we're making a concerted effort to move both populations and buck-doe ratios to the stated herd management plan objectives that are a public process that accounts for both social and biological considerations in these herds, and you also approve, as you know. So I'll move on to elk. The blue line is again the application rate. It's steady at around 200,000. You can see it's been fairly stable. The red line is the license quota recommendations for limited licenses for elk. 2/3 of our elk licenses are limited, so a significant portion of our elk hunting opportunity is limited, and then the other third, of course, is the over-the-counter bull. As you can see, we've had a 12-year decline in limited elk license recommendations. This current year's recommendations before you is 133,200, and that's a reduction of 3,500 or 3%. The vast majority of that reduction is in the southwest region, where reductions are significant at 3,100, which is 10% a reduction in the southwest region. Statewide, the antlerless reduction that you see captured in here is negative 2,300 or 3%. So I think the take home here, unfortunately, our elk licenses aren't stable like our elk application rate. And we're down about 63,000 limited elk licenses from the peak in 2004. And there's 3 main reasons that I'll highlight for that. The first is that populations are lower. We intentionally reduced elk populations in the state, and with reduced population size, of course, we have fewer elk to harvest. And secondly, lower harvest rates are necessary to maintain an elk population than to reduce it. You need a lot higher cow harvest rates to reduce an elk population than you do to maintain where you are. And finally, we have low calf ratios, which I'll address in a minute, in the southern half of the state. And so low calf ratios and low recruitment of calves to adults reduces the amount of cows that you can harvest to maintain a population size. These are the 46 elk herds in the state. There's 2 exceptions to the reduction in cow licenses. That's E2, that we all know where that is, thanks to the previous presentation. The other one is E13. Both of those are very productive herds, and we're trying to keep them at objective. The elk population estimate is 278,000, up 2,000 from last year, and that relates to the sum of population objective ranges of 224 to 273,000. So we're just slightly above the upper end of the sum of our DAU plan objectives. And then final figure on elk, I alluded to this a second ago. This is the statewide by region, the post-hunt calf-cow ratios from our post-hunt survey helicopter flights. And this past winter, we classified 92,000 elk from helicopters in December, January, and February. There's only a few states that even have that many elk, and that's how many we classified to generate these estimates to base these license recommendations on. I want to highlight, and I've pointed this out to you for the last probably 5 years. The southern half of the state historically has about 10 calves per 100 cows fewer than the northern tier of the state, for the last 30 years. However, the last 15 years or so, you can see the southern half of the state, which here is in purple. The southwest region is in purple. The southeast region is in green. You can see the southern half of the state is tracking at pretty low ratios. The 3-year average in the southeast is 30, and the southwest is 32. And the northwest and northeast have been tracking very close. Unfortunately, the last 2 years, they have had reduced calf ratios the last 2 years. Hopefully that's a blip, and next year I can tell you it's back up. I'm hoping that'll happen. the average of those two are 46 calves per 100 cows. So even though they've declined the 3-year average, so even though they have declined the last 2 years significantly higher than the southern tier of the state, which I do have one piece of good news on this elk, one piece only of good news on this elk calf, low elk calf ratios in the southern part of the state, and that's that we do now have a research project officially on the ground. Mammals researcher Matt Aldridge has initiated, and the whole agency really is extremely supportive, and Matt's getting a lot of great help from biologists and field operations on his projects. The two study sites that are the Uncompahgre Plateau and the Trinchera elk herds, which are E33 down here and E20 right here. And so he has collared elk he collared elk this winter. They looked at body condition with ultrasonography. We have pregnancy rates. We're going to capture the calves from those cows and find out what happens to those calves. So really we're trying to connect the dots between pregnancy rate and December calf-cow ratios and find out where our calves are going missing. So to conclude on elk, these license recommendations are consistent with about a 15-year trend in licensing of reduction in antlerless licenses. That said, having a combination of limited and over-the-counter licenses in various seasons allows us to offer an extremely wide range and array of hunting opportunities on the nation's largest elk herd. So I'm going to shift to pronghorn. So we have 53,000 applicants for pronghorn licenses last year. This year's license recommendation is 24,900, which is up 2,000 or 9%. The vast majority of those are in the southeast region, where about half of our pronghorn reside, and we're going up 1,800 or 12% in the southeast region, which is just shy of the peak licensing levels of 2012. The fawn doe ratios are down slightly on the plains, or else these license recommendations probably would have come in even higher, but our fawn doe ratios are down, so that's another way to get to objective besides harvest if you're not recruiting. The estimated statewide population of pronghorn is 81,100. This map shows all the DAUs, which is up from 79,400. And I do want to emphasize that 81,000 pronghorn is a record for Colorado, and it is slightly above the population objective range, or the sum of the objective ranges of 67 to 76,000. We classified 22,000 pronghorn from both fixed wing and helicopter, and these license recommendations will continue to provide a substantial amount of hunting opportunity for these incredible big game animals. And finally, on moose, I guess it'd be understated if I didn't say that, I guess it's an understatement to say that demand exceeds allocation with moose licenses. Last year we had 24,000 applicants for 341 licenses. Fortunately, moose are doing their part to meet that demand. Their herds are doing very well. Our statewide estimate is 3,000, up from 2,700 last year. The license recommendations this year are for 415 moose licenses, which is up 74 or 22%. That includes 171 bull and 244 cow. The statewide objective range for moose is 2,000 to 2,600. So at 3,000, we're above that objective, which is why we're coming in with a pretty large cow license increase in order to manage those herds to objective, just like everything else, and also just make sure they're in line with the habitat capabilities that they're in. This map shows the current moose hunting DAUs and GMUs. The solid color units are open to moose hunting. We now have 60 GMUs open to moose hunting, which is up from 39 just 4 years ago in 2013. The crosshatch ones are DAUs that are open to moose hunting, but no moose hunting yet in those GMUs. Our moose are doing very well, which is a testament to not only the transplant efforts that we have done, but also the quality moose habitat we have. And so over time, moose have expanded range on their own subsequent to our transplants, and that's a large portion of our new units and increasing licenses are in areas where moose are pioneering. So I expect moose to continue to pioneer into those crosshatch areas and open new units. Just in conclusion, overall, Colorado is blessed with extremely productive habitat for big game, and we have, like I mentioned, we have nearly 800,000 big game animals. So these licenses that are before you are 250,000 limited licenses to hunt Colorado's big game by Coloradans and our guests. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have about these recommendations or status in general of our herds.
Excellent presentation. Questions from commissioners? Mr. Pizell.
Just real quick, and thanks for the presentation. It's always informative, and there's so much information that you guys gather and put together. It's fairly amazing. I don't think this one's working either. Do you have any initial or findings or speculation on the study for the elk cow-calf ratios in the South? Is there? I know you just started, but
The only thing we know that I can report is that the body condition was fairly good in both study areas. The pregnancy was high in the Trinchera herd. And I do want to emphasize that the numbers are fairly small. They captured and collared 25 elk. It's a pilot study. The goal is to narrow the focus down a little bit, and so we can more intensively look at one part of this picture, whether it's pregnancy, body condition, predation, but they captured 50 combined in both areas. In Trinidad, the 21 of 23 were pregnant, and on the Uncompahgre Plateau, only 15 of 23 adult cows were pregnant. So, small sample, but already, just from one capture and one winter, it already gives us at least some information on the pregnancy status of those cows. So that's as far as information that I can relate at this point. That's about all we have. They just captured those elk. Literally, they were finishing capture a few weeks ago. So we're going to learn a lot. When those calves are born and we're following them and we find out what happens to them, we're going to learn an incredible amount in the next few months. So next year, I think the people that are involved in that research can probably give us a pretty good update.
Mr. Bray.
Thank you. Anecdotally, on our ranch, we harvest over 100 cow elk on our ranch, at well over 100. And we, by the lion's share, my sons and I butcher them or whatever, field dress them. Just as anecdotal as the Dickens, but we all commented this year for the lack of pregnancy rate on the cows that I mean, normally there's a high percentage of them bred. This is the first year, anecdotally, that we all commented, man, these cows aren't pregnant. And they're fat. They are in great shape. They were perhaps the best body condition of any year we've ever had.
So even compared to last year, so like a 1-year drop in pregnancy rate.
And I hope that's just a 1-year phenomenon, but, and our bull ratio's up. I mean, we got more bulls, so there's plenty of bulls to breed them. It's just anecdotal, but something's happening.
any speculation from you or opinions?
Somebody passing out birth control out there?
Perhaps.
Democrats from Boulder.
Yeah, wait a second.
Commissioner Zimmerman.
Thanks, Andy. This presentation is always really informative. I appreciate it. Question about the moose increase. I mean, I know, again, anecdotally, Summit County, I've seen more moose in town, and that was a lot due to the weather. We had a lot of moose coming down. But, I mean, I've had them in my yard a lot, and a lot fewer bear, which is really interesting. But my question is, and I'm sure Alyssa knows a lot more about this than I do. I just see what I see. But my question is about the moose, the increase in moose. Do we have any concerns in the long run? I mean, is there habitat competition? If moose populations go up, what goes down? do we want moose populations to continue on an increase? Was there a carrying capacity or a goal?
Yes, definitely. We are very happy that they're doing well, expanding their range, pioneering new habitats, and doing well where we have them. But there's definitely a concern with having too many moose. Just like everything else, there's a certain capability of the habitat to support them, and we don't want to exceed that amount. And so in Unit 37, I assume you live in that area, Silverthorne, Breckenridge area. In Unit 37, we went up pretty dramatically in cow licenses this year. Off the top of my head, I couldn't remember the percentages, but 83% increase from 12 to 22. So I think the staff in that area are also seeing the same thing, I guess, from what I see in the license recommendations, that we definitely don't want to exceed the number of moose that we should have in those fairly narrow riparian corridors in Summit County.
Straight.
Are we going to have a bear presentation? I'm just looking at the agenda. I had a comment, but I wanted to wait till after that.
Yeah, the bears are going to be next.
Okay.
Okay. So you want to hold till after
Yeah.
bear presentation? Any other questions here? None? Okay, go ahead, Jerry. Not Jerry. Yeah.
Good segue there, Commissioner Howard. Moving along.
There you go.
Chairman, Commissioners, Director Broscheid, this is my first time addressing the Parks and Wildlife Commission. For the record, my name is Matthew Eckert, and I am the Terrestrial Program Supervisor for the Terrestrial Section. Today, I am presenting the 2017 Black Bear License Recommendations. This is a statewide distribution of our 17 bear DAUs. Note that these are not herd management units like they are for ungulates. Bears are not a herd species. So the boundaries carry no biological or ecological significance. But we still use DAUs to manage bears according to locally developed objectives. Currently, 10 of the 17 DAUs have been revised and updated, and we'll continually work on meeting that 17, updating them all. We monitor bear populations and DAUs differently for bears than we do for ungulates. We use different metrics, and we do not establish population objective ranges for bears. Instead, we set trend strategies, and we use indices that inform us about those trends. This is a list of the kinds of information we collect that indicate whether we are meeting our DAU objectives. And generally speaking, we use a preponderance of the evidence that's collected, no single piece of evidence, to make our conclusions. This slide shows license history. On the left graph, it shows the past 13 years of total licenses available, and that's the top blue line, and the total licenses sold, the bottom green line. The 2005 starting point was chosen because prior to that date, we were using a different season structure and a different license distribution structure. In 2005, we were also coming out of a 5-year prolonged and widespread drought. So we decreased licenses in 2005, again in 2006, and to a lesser extent in 2007. In 2010, we received results from a DNA-based inventory project that showed populations were about double the size we thought they were. And the Commission superseded prior management direction, which led to a substantial increase in licenses. In recent years, we see a growing separation, if you look to the right of that left graph, a growing separation between licenses made available and those that are sold. This may indicate that under the current regime, we may have reached this saturation point where it doesn't really matter how many licenses we increase. We're not going to get the hunters to buy them. And thus, that may not increase the number of bears that we can harvest. So that's an important consideration. And the right graph It shows a year-to-year change in license numbers. So you can see on the left-hand side in purple, you see that decrease in licenses that were made post-drought. In 2010 to 2012, that's when we had the robust finding of the robust population numbers. And you can see the dramatic increase in licenses that occurred all the way up to 2014. In 2015 and 2016, very small changes made in licenses. Now let's look at 2017 with the upcoming year. There's a slight 1% statewide increase in licenses from last year's levels. That's an increase of about 318 licenses. Considering hunter success, this is estimated to increase harvest by 22 bears. Total estimated harvest for 2017 is 1,075 bears. Beyond licensing, let's look at some different types of information that we have about bears. Let's look at types of bear mortality. Going back to 1979. The yellow on this graph shows the proportion of hunter harvest in the total mortality. And I'd like to point out that most bears are harvested in the September hunting seasons. You also see an increase in the proportion of control mortality and all other forms of mortality, and that is the green and the blue bars. In recent years, this mortality does not come from hunter harvest. That amounts to about 25 to 35% of total bear mortality. In response to increasing licenses and increased hunter harvest, we find that bear harvest composition has changed over time. And to give you a better understanding of what harvest composition means, it can be, I guess, explained as the relative amounts of gender and age classes of bears that are found in the harvest. In decreasing bear populations, more of a textbook look at things, research has informed us that bear composition is typified by a relatively small percentage of adult males, an increasing number of females of all ages, and a large and increasing number of adult females in the harvest. This chart displays the characteristics of a decreasing bear population, and that it probably has been gradually decreasing since about 2011. This chart shows hunter success rates in September, going all the way back to 1996. A variety of things influence hunter success rates. If you can account for most of the common things that affect success and perhaps bear behavior, all things being equal, a decreasing hunter success suggests that we have a decrease in bear population or abundance. Remember that we drastically increased licenses in 2010 to 2014. Hunter success remained high for those first 2 years, 10 to 12%, and then started to decline in that same time period. We know that vastly increasing licenses tends to drive hunter success downward, and when we account for things like license increases and changes in fall forage, things that affect bear vulnerability to harvest, the decreasing trend in September hunter success rate is another indication that Colorado's bear is declining. Bear populations are declining. Many people in this agency work together to manage human-bear conflict. Without the hard work of our regional staff, especially the DWM's customer service representatives, and of course the research, education, terrestrial policy staff, everyone that's involved, without these people, we lose our ability to manage bears. Jerry Apter, our statewide carnivore and fur bear manager, he couldn't be here today, but he prepared a lot of notes on the subject that highlighted his respect and appreciation for all of the work that goes into this and all the people involved. I would read those notes, but we'd be here past lunch. His key messages on human-bear conflict are displayed in these 3 charts. If you focus on the top 2 charts first, it tells us that on the left, the agricultural bear damage claims paid, bear damage claims have been declining. But on the right, it tells us that the index financial cost to the agency for damage claims is more or less flat. if not slightly increasing. Now, both graphs have a lot of noise in them. There's a lot of variability from a year-to-year basis. So a single year can throw off that line of best fit. And not displayed here is the total number of stock animals and beehives involved in the damage claims, and that number is more or less completely flat across the same sweep of years. But in combination, this information suggests that, that bear damage incidents are down on a statewide basis, and that the value per animal claimed is what has increased. This is a market function way out of our control, but it's something we need to keep our eye on. The chart on the lower right displays the increasing trend since 1995, and that includes all types of human-bear conflicts. The statewide chart displays the combined number of written human-bear conflict reports, the number of bear damage claims submitted, and the number of control and roadkill bear mortalities in the state. I have to take a look all the way to the right, what Jerry Abger calls a sense of hope, as we have a decrease in the number of conflicts, especially in the last 2 years. It's a pretty sharp decrease. However, with a very rapidly growing human population, this is likely to change, and we should expect an increase in conflicts over time. Well, that's the end of the presentation that I have for you today, but I did want to say one thing about my take-home message, which is coming from our entire unit here. Briefly, to summarize the big picture on 2017 bear license recommendations, we're proud to say that the recommendations are aligned with the desired management objectives set in the DAUs. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions? I believe Mr. Howard has a question.
It's really more of a comment. First, I just want to thank staff for the presentation. I think these are really informative, and it's amazing how much material they cover in such a short time with us. So, but the other comment I wanted to make, Mr. Chairman, and just following up on something I suggested and you endorsed in December was, when we talk about predators and science, we have had 2 days of science. We talked about it in the water project yesterday, in wildlife mitigation. We talked about it most of today. And I see a lot of sportsmen's groups, which are my constituency, that are here today. But I don't see a lot of folks from December's meeting here. And I feel like if they were here, they would see how much science we talk about and how valuable that is, and how our message and decision-making is science-driven. And that would be helpful, I think. So again, I want to encourage them to come and invite them to come, not just when we have a controversial meeting, but when we have these really great scientific presentations that are the basis for our decision. I think it would make all of us better, and if they want to disagree with it, staff's here, they can answer those questions and disagreements. So I just wanted to make that comment, Mr. Chairman.
That's excellent. Anybody else on bears? Okay, public comment. Matt, no other questions, discussion. We're going to do public comment on this topic. Bill Canterbury and Denny Behrens have signed up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. And what I wanted to talk on was the agricultural land. Is that appropriate for right now?
Sure.
Okay. I sat on that panel, for 2 years with the landowner voucher program, and I'm trying to figure out where you're going with it, because what we discussed on that was if a local county has it as agricultural land, it could be ag forestry, ag residential, and if there was 160 acres of contiguous land in the same name, in other words, there could be 40 acre parcels, but it has to have the exact name in the deed, that would be the first step in qualifying it in the program, but only the first step. Then on 160 acres, you would have multiple things. Is there wildlife on it during the wintering range? Is it a migratory route? Do they calve there? And do you have agricultural damage to your crop or to the grazing? So you'd have to take all of that into consideration to determine whether it actually qualified. So I'm not listening to what you was at there. I'm not quite there with where you're going or wanting to do with these homeowners associations. Do they hold 160-acre parcels? I'm kind of asking this question.
Mr. Bray?
I don't know if you were in the room, Bill. We pulled that.
Right, you pulled it, but was going to bring it up later.
We're going to study it.
Okay,
Try to answer some of the questions you're just.
okay. Well, that answers my question then.
Okay, so Danielle, and you'll take note of Mr. Canterbury's question. Okay, Denny Behrens. Thank you, Mr. Canterbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Danny Behrens, and I'm with Big Game Forever. A couple things on the elk situation. I have had numerous conversations with Stan Winery, County Commissioner from Lake City, Hinsdale County, concerning elk populations. And they're very, very concerned about the proposed licenses for 66 and 67 on cows. It is proposed for 1,070 cows to be taken out of that area for licenses. And I know that particular area because I hunt it periodically when I draw, but I do spend a lot of time down there. And we are not seeing those elk populations. And I think Commissioner Preisel, you can vouch for that. We hunt just on the north side of the divide in 66, but we spend time in 76 glassing and looking at those areas, and we are seeing a major decline in elk populations. So if we're trying to grow that southern herd, I think it behooves us as sportsmen, commissioners, CPW, to grow the herd. And in order to grow the herd, you got to quit killing cows. So our recommendation is we had a meeting with Mary Lloyd just before coming in here, and so for the first time, I really understood that we have an opportunity in this meeting to change those numbers. Before, we always thought that they were set, but she says that actually, when you vote today, that's when the computer kicks in on what is recommended and goes. And so you have an opportunity to make some changes. And if we're trying to grow our populations of deer and elk in order to increase populations, in order to increase tags available, and in order to increase revenue, I think we need to take a hard look at trying to cut back on those tags, increase those populations, and probably in 3 years we'll see a increase in our populations of elk, especially in that area. On deer, as you know, Big Game Forever was heavily involved in the Gunnison issue this year. And because of sportsmen, and I need to verify if I could. Pat, are you in the room?
Right here.
Oh. I think that the Southwest region and Pat and their office really took a hard look at what was happening down there. And if I can verify this, you have a 77% cut in buck tags? Is it close to that?
I don't remember. I've got the numbers right here, and I don't have my reading glasses, Denny, so feel free to take a look.
You're asking me?
But, well, here, the percentages. Do you have the percentages, Andy?
Yeah.
Those are the first ones. Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
Yeah, for the Gunnison Basin in total, the recommendation is from 1,600 down to 645 buck licenses, which is a reduction of 955 or 60%. And the range, Denny, by DAU is from 49% down to 73% reduction in buck licenses.
Okay. Thank you. We think that's a positive response to what's happened during the winter range down there this year. Fawn mortality is at 70, almost 80% for there. So our question is, if we're doing that in the winter range area where we had really tough winter, and we're reducing those tags. Why are we increasing buck tags in areas where we had winter range in the Northwest, when we had problems? So we believe, again, if you're trying to increase your deer herd in those areas, why would you continue to kill bucks in those areas if we had severe winter? So, again, we're asking that you cut those tags and keep the increase at what it was last year, don't increase it, and let's see what happens with those deer populations. It's been a long time since we've been over 5,000 or 500,000 deer in this state. 2007, you were over 600,000. So if we're trying to increase abundant big game populations, then I think we need to take a hard look at that. So one thing I will say, I did talk to Stan Young from APHIS a week ago. We had a youth hunter on a turkey hunt, and he missed it 35 yards. He had 3 turkeys in front of him, and the rest of us fell over backwards. But it was his first turkey hunt. He shot high, and we probably seen 12 toms that day. And the kid was elated. He was more sick with himself than his dad was. So anyway, but in talking to Stan, the increase of bears that they're seeing on the south side of the Grand Mesa was incredible. In the Dirty George area, which I'm familiar because in the past CMDA has done a lot of habitat work on those ranches, or that ranch right there, Corey Ranch. In those drainages, Stan said that he was seeing 5 to 7 bears in those drainages, individual bears. A lot of them were the 200 to 200 pound range. A lot of them were young bears. So that tells us at least that there is an increase in populations. So anyway, that if we're going to have increase in harvest, we've recommended in the past that maybe the bear tag should be a statewide tag for a couple of years, and then come back and revisit it again and see if we can't get our harvest up. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Denny. Okay, so I'd entertain a motion to, this is action, right? Approve the changes proposed for Chapter W2 Big Game 2 CCR 406-2 without the amendment involving the definition of agricultural land, which we pulled out before. So,
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question of Mr. Holland on the Gunnison? You addressed the Gunnison deer
sure.
license reduction. Can you address the elk license?
Yeah, be my pleasure. So the herd that Mr. Behrens is talking about is E25, and if you remember, you just approved the new E25 DAU plan in January, so it's just a few months old, and the new objective is 6,000 to 7,000, and the current population estimate is at the bottom end of that. And so the recommendations before you are already reducing cow licenses by 15%, which is 195 licenses, to manage to that new DAU plan objective. And Regional Manager Pat Dorsey wanted to make sure I also relayed that the discussion was to get to that new population objective over a course of 3 to 5 years, and that 15% reduction is what it would take to do that, rather than just doing it all at once. And finally, I also wanted to, for the record, just think back a couple years. I'm as guilty as everybody. I look at last year and this year, and that's my comparative comparison for you guys. But in 2014, we already reduced the E25 cow licenses by 25% in anticipation of a new DAU plan that we knew was coming. So it's not just a one-year reduction in cow licenses. We've reduced significantly over the last few years.
I have a follow-up question, if
Sure.
I may. You may not know the answer to this, but are those licenses over or under subscribed? In other words, are there leftovers after the draw?
I can check. I would be surprised if they are. I bet they're not. Let me. So there, for E25, every single hunt code goes in the draw first choice, with the exception of 2 hunt codes which go second choice. The fourth season in 66 is a second choice, and the bull license in 67 second season is a second choice. All the rest of them go first choice in the draw, so 0 of those licenses are undersubscribed.
Because I would suggest, particularly in the Southwest, but we start taking a look at the leftover situation. I know when we had to address this on the buck side years ago, when our buck numbers crashed statewide, we passed a policy that we would burn any leftover buck tags. I assume that's still in place. I think we need to take a look at that on some of these cow elk herds.
I mean, we're doing some, but we obviously have a problem, and
You can still give the hunters that want to apply their license, and they're either sex license, but if you have these great big numbers of leftovers, looks to me like there's a place you could cut numbers, because people come in late, but it's not their primary hunt, it's not their first hunt. So I think we could start taking a look. I hate to get us to a point where we've got to fall off the cliff, particularly on the elk side. I think we've addressed the deer side pretty well, but
That leftover policy is something that we could certainly talk about, but I know because of the 12-year decline in, or reduction in cow licenses primarily, the days of picking up cow licenses left over are mostly gone on their own, just because of lower quotas. And honestly, there's a lot of people out there that we sort of made a lot of people into cow hunters through those years of high cow license quotas, and a lot of them are fairly reluctant to go back. So some of our late cows and our other cow licenses are in really high demand, and actually taking them preference points to draw.
well, I'm all for those type people, but in my area, we have 300 or 400 leftover cow tags every year, and I think that would be an area that we could take a look at burning some of those after the draw.
We can sure look at E24, Commissioner Bray, but most of the time those are PLOs, and we intentionally set those PLO licenses really high so that if there are conflicts during the seasons, we can get those in the hands, and we can look at that specifically for that unit. But yeah, I'm getting nods that those are PLOs to address game damage.
Well, it's something to look at and to talk about. I'm not suggesting we do it this year. I'm just saying for future, it's something in our playbook we can look at.
Okay, any other questions of Andy? Do we have a motion from anybody?
Well,
You have a question?
just a
Mr.
comment
Zip.
that, Denny, we're hearing your concern and comments on the herds, and it appears that staff is, we're looking at reductions throughout the Southwest of 10 to 36% reduction in doe or cow tags, and I think there's a track record there. We're monitoring those herds, and if we're not seeing what we expect to, we remain flexible in future years, but we are taking steps to address the population. It sounds like there's discrepancy between what staff population estimates are versus on the ground for firsthand, but I just want to point out that I think these numbers are an attempt to address your concerns and the other people in particularly unit, is it 25? Yeah, 25 and 30 So we hear you, and hopefully our staff recommendations here will address those population concerns.
Any other questions? Motion? Does anybody wish to offer a motion? We just, if we don't, we don't.
No, I'll move.
All right.
I'll make the
Mr. Horn moves, second.
Eliminating the amendment on the definition of agricultural.
Correct. All right, so Commissioner Horn moves the changes to Chapter W2 minus the agricultural amendment, as we talked about earlier. Mr. Howard seconds. This is going to be a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? None opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Let me point out just a little time management. We're about 15, maybe 20 minutes behind schedule, and the next item is number 25, license suspension decision appeal for Mr. Hanson, I guess, Garrett Hanson.
Good morning, Director Broscheid, Chairman Pribble, Commissioners. My name is Steve Cooley, State Hearing Examiner. Today's license suspension appeal on case number 7381. Mr. Garrett Hanson is requesting a review of his initial suspension decision of 5 years. Following is a brief summary of Officer Spowert's case report involving the case. On December 3rd, 2015, neighbors of Mr. Hanson reported that he had shot and wounded a large 6-point bull elk taken in a subdivision near Drake, Colorado. There was no open hunting season in this area at the time, and Mr. Hanson did not have any 2015 elk license. When confronted by his neighbors, Mr. Hanson went into his house and left the paralyzed and wounded bull elk for over 2 hours. Mr. Hanson did finally call his father in Iowa, who urged him to put the elk out of its misery, which he did with a shot to the head. Mr. Hanson was charged in the case and eventually reached a plea agreement with the court, where he did plead guilty to 4 charges, including hunting outside an established season, taking an elk without a license, illegal possession of wildlife, and hunting elk without required orange clothing. I'll ask Mr. Hanson and his father to come up and address the commission at this time. They've requested to do so, and I'll have some follow-up comments when they're done.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Hanson?
Hi, I'm Garrett Hanson, and I would like to thank you for having me here on this day. I grew up hunting, fishing, and trapping with my dad and brother in Iowa, who taught me to do it the right way. What I did on December 3rd, 2015 was illegal, unethical, immoral, selfish, greedy, and childish, and I have no excuse for it. It's too late to go back to relive that day, but I fully regret my actions. I have apologized to all of my neighbors and made amends with them. I have paid $5,000 in fines with the last payment this month due to my cooperation and honesty. Over a year went by before I heard from a license suspension officer, when I learned to my surprise that my hearing had taken place unbeknownst to me, resulting in a 5-year suspension of my hunting, trapping, and fishing privileges in approximately 20 states. I am in no way belittling what I did to the elk. It was egregious, and I am ashamed of myself. I am only asking you to be open-minded and consider a lesser or alternate suspension. I would be willing to volunteer for my community in order to redeem my character. Thank you for your time, and I'm sorry for what I've done.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson.
Excuse me. I am Kyle Hanson, Garrett Hanson's father. First of all, I'd like to thank you for having us here. And I am speaking on behalf of my son, who cannot afford a lawyer for this matter, which I did not feel was necessary anyway. I guess I'm a little bit from the old school. You don't need a lawyer for everything. My son moved to Colorado because of numerous family vacations and loves the mountains and hunting and fishing, as I do. What my son did was shoot a trophy elk on Storm Mountain on December 3rd, 2015, on our neighbor's property. He did this out of season with no big game license and no hunted orange, and it was 1 or 2 days out of the season. I'm not sure. What he did was very wrong, stupid, greedy, immature. He was 21 years old, and many other adjectives. He had never seen a bull elk up close and got caught up in the moment, and I can't make any other excuses. He paid a large fine of $5,000, not missing a payment. Last partial payments next month. He didn't miss a payment. He needed a $5,000 truck, a lot worse than the fine, but he got what he got, and I have no problem with that. He makes $12 an hour at his job, so he could have used a truck a lot worse, but he screwed up. So he is reminded every month how bad he screwed up when he makes that payment. I am standing up here and I'm not able to say I never screwed up when I was young and did something that I don't regret. And I ask all of you to ask yourself the same thing. If you've ever done anything when you were young that was stupid, that you regret. Because I can't say that honestly, that I can't. Because I did some things too when I was young that weren't very respectable. Now, what my son did not do, he did not run away, he did not lie, deny, or complicate or impede this investigation in any way. He went back up into his house after his neighbors screamed at him to get away from the elk, which he was trying to finish the elk off to put it out of its misery, what I told him to do. They screamed at him and said, get away from it. And I probably would have done the same thing had I been there. Told him to get away from it. Anyway, he instead called me in Iowa. Oh, by the way, he did not complicate or impede the investigation in any way. He did take the scope off the 30-06 rifle. It wasn't a 22, by the way. It was a 30-06. He took the scope off the rifle because he knew it was going away and probably never see it again. So he took the scope off. I can't answer why he did that. As soon as Officer Spowert asked him about it, he handed it over. So he instead of finishing off the elk first, he instead called me in Iowa crying and said, Dad, I royally screwed up and in deep trouble. He told me briefly what he had done and that the elk was still alive, possibly paralyzed. I told him to get over there and put it out of his misery. He told me each time he tried, the neighbors screamed at him. Like I said, I probably would have screamed at him too if I had been there. Which sometime before Officer Spowert arrived, in those 2 hours, he did go over and dispatch the elk. I told him to be waiting for the officer when he arrived with his gun, but obviously not in hand, but with his gun, and forfeit the gun, and he said I planned on that already. He'd already knew he was turning himself in. He didn't run away. He didn't go off to another county. They didn't have to chase him down. Anyway, after talking to Officer Spowert on the phone numerous times, I believe my son was very cooperative that day, as cooperative as what he was wrong that morning. We were told it could be several months before he would hear anything on the suspension because of a retirement of the last examiner. So we weren't looking for anything right away. He said it could be several months, could be a year. So we weren't looking for anything. Officer Spowert said he could hunt until the suspension hearing. He told me that multiple times. Let him keep hunting until he loses his license. However, he did not hunt from December 3rd, that morning, until today, voluntarily, because of me and my wife, the way he was raised. Anyway, he did not hunt legally, illegally, or any other way since that day. So he had a self-imposed suspension. So, on January 10th of this year, 2017, we received a certified letter telling us that he had a 5-year suspension from January 4th of this year, when they made that decision, from the December 13th hearing that he knew nothing of. We were shocked, to say the least, at how he could get a 5-year suspension, the maximum in this case. If it's in there, item number 10, 11, and 12, the conclusions of the law, it explains 0 to 5 years for what he had done wrong, along with the fine. Anyway, without him knowing of the hearing, and possibly because of not being there. And if I were on the other side of this and somebody didn't show up for their hearing and didn't send any written mitigation, I might have went the same way, because he didn't show that he cared. He didn't show any remorse, nothing. Well, that's not the case. He did not know of the hearing, which I'm not here to place blame on any one individual or any agency or any post office, but Officer Spowert knew where he lived, had my phone number, his phone number. He's paying a fine every month to Larimore County. They knew his current address, and I know that's not the same agency. I realize that. So, anyway, moving right along here. Officer Spowert stated early on that he would suggest a lesser suspension of 1 to 2 years because of his cooperation, his honesty, and his youth, young and foolish. Even though Officer Spowert made it perfectly clear it was not his call. He said he would suggest it. But that sometimes in the past, the hearing examiner would confide in the arresting officer, which I would hope he would, to find out what really did happen that day. And I think he did. Spowert seemed, believe it or not, empathetic to my son that morning. He was very disgusted with him, and he said if it was his son, he'd do everything but you know what. And I said the same. I agreed with him. But he's somewhat empathetic to my son because he was so damn honest and cooperative that morning. Stood there and said, here I am. And obviously was very sorry for what he did. I am not here to place blame on any one person or agency for Garrett not receiving any notice on December 13th for that hearing. The Drake, Colorado Post Office, I got a picture of it. It's about from this wall to that wall and tinier than that. It's tiny. Very small town, small post office. But anyway, the Drake Post Office is very small, and I wish I knew why there was not more of an attempt to get the notice to him. It went to his name, Drake, Colorado, but the wrong zip code. It was Loveland zip code, his old zip code. Why that didn't get forwarded, I don't know. And the previous P.O. box. And it had his right address, 0 Galena Court, where he lives. My son is not a fugitive. He did not run away. He didn't leave the country, leave the state, leave the area. He stood right there. And he's also, like I said before, he's paying a fine every month to Larimore County. He's got an address. He's got a current address. And I know that's a different agency. But anyway, as Officer Spowert would have been able to help with any confusion, my phone number, his phone number, whatever. The letter of the final decision came to our address, Garrett's previous address in Iowa, no problem. Certified letter, opened it up one day, and I was shocked to see, but he missed his hearing, he didn't know about it. Anyway. There's not saying any one person is blamed for this. My opinion would be a 5-year suspension was for somebody a little bit less cooperative, or a repeat offender, or a lengthy investigation. There was no chase, there was no long investigation. He turned himself in, like I told him he was going to do, and he was planning on doing even before he called me, crying, because he knew how bad he had screwed up. or somebody so ruthless that they could care less about their hunting and fishing privileges. And this is not the case with him. He grew up doing that with me and his younger brother. December 13th, 2015 was a day of living hell for my wife and I. We didn't know the fate of our son 10 hours away. And I had an emergency surgery that day for a severe nosebleed. And I know why. And if you want to roll your eyes, roll your eyes. But that's what happened that day. That afternoon, I had emergency surgery, hauled in by my own ambulance service that I volunteer at. And he quit hunting voluntarily because of my wife and I. He was not raised to act in that manner. Garrett and I begged for another hearing, but was told it was not possible. Don't know why. It was not possible. Only an appeal process was his only avenue for being heard. After thinking of a second hearing possibly, I realized it would kind of be meaningless, and this is my opinion. It'd be meaningless because you can't have a second chance at a first impression. You know, if it's the same agency giving in the second hearing, which I don't know the hearing examiner personally, just met him this morning in the hallway. But I would, if I was him, I would be a little bit biased to have a second hearing. It'd be, you know, to me it wouldn't make sense, but that's my opinion. Like I say, you can't have a second chance at a first impression. My son has come 6 hours and taken 2 days off work. I have came almost 18 hours and taken a week off work, which that's not your problem, that's ours. For this, and Garrett and I wish we would have known of the hearing because we would have obviously been there. And that proves it, how far we came for this. We would have obviously been there. I would have been there to represent him, to help him. Seems that because of a retirement or the miscommunication, Garrett received the maximum 5-year suspension under the set circumstances. He and I also went to all the affected adjoining neighbors and apologized for that day, and am happy that we are on speaking terms with all of them. Garrett has dropped off chicken eggs, done their chores numerous times. One neighbor, Mrs. Rosen, that called him in, told us she thought it was an older man disgruntled up there. She was surprised that it was a young kid up there that did this. Clark Weichert, the next door neighbor, which the property where the elk was shot, has taken us out for supper since then. I am not belittling what he did that day, and I don't understand how he was unreachable until after any chance of a hearing. And I beg you to consider a lesser or an alternative suspension. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson.
You're far better than any attorney.
Yeah, I enjoyed talking to him this morning out in the hallway. My office sends out hundreds of notices of hearings every year, hundreds and hundreds actually, and some of these do get returned as undeliverable. The hearings office uses the best address available. Generally, it's the officer's citation that we use. In this case, Officer Spowert had 2 addresses written down in the single address line, one for a Drake address, one for a Loveland address. And what I will say is that when we sent this out initially, we did send it to a Drake, the city of Drake, using a Loveland zip code. So that one is on the hearings office. It took a long time. They attempted to deliver these things over a period of time. When it got back to us, there just simply wasn't time to renotice them. I can't even say it was noticed at that time. It wasn't until this appeal came up we started kind of drilling down into this and looking at the various addresses that were used in this case. As it turns out, however, neither one of the addresses used on the citation or the one that Larimer County has of a P.O. Box of 401 were current addresses, as he mentioned. I'm not sure if he would have gotten them had my office gotten it right in the first place. However, all that being said, after talking to Mr. Hanson and his father today out in the hallway, if, you know, given kind of all the comedy of errors that went through with this, from the citation down to trying to get this delivered to Drake, if the commission deems it appropriate, absolutely no problem re-noticing Mr. Hanson for another hearing. Any questions?
Mr. Howard?
Mr. Chairman, I'm a little confused. I don't, I will say that I am sympathetic on the hearing for, and I'll use a lawyer word, due process reasons. I think we always favor giving people a chance to make their case, but I don't believe that's what we're being asked for by Mr. Hanson, and so that's where I'm confused. I appreciate the hearing office being willing to have another hearing, but if instead what we're being asked to do is an appeal of the 5-year sentence, well, you know, I'm not as sympathetic at all on that. So I'd like a little clarification. I think it's a very generous offer by staff here, but I'm not certain that's what the Hansons are asking for.
You know,
Mr.
when I looked through the deal, when it came to me, and you know, we see the worst cases. We see some where I think guys blew it off, and then they found out they lost their license in all the different states, and they come back and they miraculously don't know why they didn't get the letter. My thought is he deserves a hearing, and that was kind of what my thinking was then. And I'll still link back to what Mr. Monahan always says: we can do whatever we want to do in here. We could cut it back to 1 year, or say he can get his license back. And my thought is, I think he deserves a hearing, and I think if he's offering to give it to it, I'm satisfied with that right now. I mean, he may get 5 years again from Mr. Cooley, but I think we can do whatever we want to do in here. We don't have Mr. Monahan tell us we can't.
Well, and I'm in agreement with you, Commissioner Wingfield. I'm just asking you, is that what the Hansons would like? I was expecting to hear they wanted a new hearing, and instead I think what I'm hearing is they want a lower sentence.
I'm pretty sure they'd like that.
Instead of a hearing.
I'm sure they would.
So I'll ask Mr. Cooley, in a new hearing, if we were to grant a rehearing or a new hearing, a hearing that was never held, and because we've admitted that we were culpable in the failure of the communication, what are the possibilities in that hearing? What are the range of possibilities that you can choose among by the law?
It would be going back to the original options, and that would be 0 to 5 years in this case. When Mr. Hanson said is absolutely correct. I didn't have an opportunity to hear any mitigating circumstances or, you know, the other side of the story. In terms of communication with Officer Spout, that is not something that the hearings office does. That's ex parte communication. We don't talk with the officers because these two processes are separated. In terms of a recommendation for 1 year from Officer Spout, that was neither in the case report nor communicated to me. I've never seen that before. So the range of options would remain the same, 0 to 5 years. In terms of being biased, I can't say I'd be any more biased than I was the first time I read the case, and that was just simply reading the facts as Officer Spout provided them. And if he came in for another hearing, I can honestly say there would be absolutely no bias in this one way or the other. I'd approach it as any other hearing and listen to the facts of the case.
And under the law, once you've had the proper hearing and made whatever recommended suspension that might be different than what sits today, they'd still have the opportunity to appeal that suspension, correct?
I would think so, but without discussing this with Tim Monahan, I can't say for sure.
Okay.
I don't even pretend to know the law that well.
Right. So it seems we have several questions here.
And I would just
Mr. Pizzell.
wonder if Ms. Horn would have an opinion, but it's, I mean. But it seems to me, you know, I don't know, you know, a lot of staff time, a lot of lawyer time in the family, to go through another hearing. Are we better served to make a decision on what we think is an appropriate punishment for this case? Or do we want another hearing to let them decide?
I think you've made the question quite clear. Ms. Zimmerman.
This is perhaps just a process question. Why is the fine paid to Larimer County? Isn't the fine a CPW fine?
If it's issued as a penalty assessment and paid as a penalty assessment, then it does get paid to law enforcement and to the state. If they go to court and becomes a court process, it becomes a county process, and so it is, the payments are made to Larimer County at that point.
Mr. Zip, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to, I guess, ask again for clarification from Hanson's, or make a suggestion. I'm not ready personally to make a recommendation on an alternate sentence, but I guess my recommendation to the Hansons would be to withdraw the appeal and request for a hearing and go through the process again. So that's my recommendation to the Hansons.
Ms. Horn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to say I appreciate your showing remorse, because in my 5 years of being on the commission, I've not seen genuine remorse, and I see that and I appreciate it. Secondly, I think 5 years was light, given what you did, given the fact that the animal laid there and suffered. You're professing to be ethical and wanting to do the right thing. Once you realized at that moment you did the wrong thing, putting that animal out of its misery would have been the best thing to do. Not calling your father, not letting the neighbors run you off. So my feeling is 5 years was light. On a point of clarification, how did the officer get the address? Did he ask you for the address? How did the officer come up with the address?
Yes, ma'am, he asked me for the address, and at the time I had a P.O. box in Loveland, P.O. Box 401, 80539. My physical address was 0 Galena Court. In the year that passed before I was contacted by the suspension officer, I obtained a P.O. box in Drake, P.O. Box 34. And discontinued mine in Loveland.
Well, I would think one of the lessons learned from this is when you commit a crime and do something wrong, to take the responsibility. The burden's on you to keep the law enforcement, to keep the offices, to keep the agencies informed. It's not their job. They had due diligence in trying to reach you. 2 certified letters returned due to it being the wrong address. I would think one of the main lessons you would learn is take responsibility and make sure, even though you were making your payments, that wasn't going to the agency, to Parks and Wildlife. So I do appreciate your remorse. Like I said, I have not heard that before, but it's my feeling that the 5 years was a light sentence.
I want to, my personal follow-up as chair, I want to clarify, didn't we, based on Commissioner Horn's remarks, didn't the hearing officer admit that the office was somehow in error or culpable in this address confusion? Did you not just say that?
I did, yes. When we sent out the notice of hearing, it had the correct address, it had the city of Drake, however, it had a Loveland zip code from his other P.O. box on it.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right, so Chair is willing to hear a motion. Mr. Zip?
Just to clarify, though, that Mr. Garrett was given the maximum sentence. So we probably all have opinions as to what we personally feel is the appropriate penalty, but the fact is, in this instance, he was given the maximum penalty as far as suspension.
That is correct.
So just to clarify that, and again, I'd make my same suggestion to the Hansons about their, how they want to proceed.
Sorry.
I think what Mr. Zip's saying is what I haven't said as eloquently is we need the Hansons to come up to the
So
podium.
We are. and I appreciate that suggestion. Like I said before, it's hard to make a you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. It'd be like showing up to a job interview drunk and mouthy and then going back the next week sober. It would be, to me, it'd be pointless. He didn't show up for the first hearing for whatever reasons. He didn't know about it. So, you know, I guess I think it'd be biased to have a second hearing. But the one point I do want to bring forward is, after the fact, we got the letter in Iowa, no problem, to his last address. I just wish, and Garrett wishes, that would have showed up before the fact, not after the fact. So, and like I said before, Officer Spowert had her phone numbers, address, and everything else. And I know he doesn't work in the same office. I understand that. But that letter, after it was done and over with, the decision was made, came to Iowa, no problem, and it was certified to us. But
Good. So, I'm, Mr. Wingfield.
I want to make a suggestion. You know, Mr. Cooley hasn't been here this long, and I don't know what his thinking is, and if you guys refuse to drop your appeal and take the hearing that he's offered you, I'll make a motion to recommend a 3-year deal, but I'm going to probably promise you it's probably not going to pass.
Excuse me?
I don't think it's going to pass. I
Okay.
mean, I
Well-
don't see that happen. I think your best chance, give Mr. Cooley a
Okay.
chance to make a first impression.
The one other problem with it, and he's explained to us that we could do it via phone. I'm 16 hours away, and I really, truthfully, it's going to be hard for me to come out here again for another hearing. And Garrett started a job, 2 months ago? It's kind of hard for him to get off work. He'll try to, but that's our end of it, the complications on our end of it. And we waited from January until May for this, of course. As I said, well, why not wait for this? And you are right, it said 0 to 5 years on there, even though I'd be right along with you wanting to throw the book at him for 20 years, Mrs. Horn. I'd be right with you. Let's throw the book at him. And what he did, you know, we got a room full of people that are into hunting and love the sport as we do. And so he's not going to see any sympathy here on the 5 years, I guess. But it was 0 to 5 years. It's right in there. On item 10, 11, and 12, it explains that, 0 to 5 years. And I feel he got the maximum because he didn't show up for a hearing he never knew about.
Understand. Mr. Wingfield, I don't know that I heard you completely. You said you'd be willing to offer a motion for what?
For a reduced sentence, what I will offer.
Reduced sentence,
Yeah, if he
but
didn't
you were
want-
fearful it would not pass.
That's my fear. And maybe you guys will surprise me,
How
but
about this, and let's just see where it goes, and I'm such a softie this morning, I'm glad I have Jim between us here so you don't slap me. Look at her, she's giving me.
Well, I just want to suggest, you know, we can try 2 motions here. I mean, we're not limited in the number of motions we can.
Motion, I was gonna say, time served, I would make a motion for another year of suspension. The other thing that in these cases, I want the person to educate others. That's my big thing. If it was in Colorado, I would say I would require you to go to hunter safety classes and talk to kids and children. Tell them what you did. Own what you did. It's yours. Tell them that it's not a good road to go down. I don't know how I require that in Iowa. I'm willing to make that motion. Ms. Horn is going to beat me up when we get outside, and she's stronger than I am. See if it goes anywhere.
So we've got a
If he was 40 years old, we wouldn't be standing here. He was 21 years old when he did it, and like I said before, I've done some things I was ashamed of when I was that young, too.
Right.
I wouldn't be representing him if he was older.
Understand, Mr. Hanson. All right, so we've got a motion from Commissioner Pizell for
Another year of suspension.
well, you're right, so we don't, when did the suspension begin? January 4th of this year?
it
Or
hasn't
is-
started
It
yet.
would be 2 years.
No, he hadn't hunted since December.
I thought it started in January, right?
Until this hearing.
That's correct.
What's correct?
The suspension went into effect of January of this year. He has
Suspension went into
voluntarily
effect
not
January.
hunted since the incident.
All right, do you wish to give him credit for the voluntary time, or just since this January?
Today, right?
2 years total.
2 years total, but
2.5 years total. I'm in negotiations with
including,
Jeannie Horn.
Dale? Commissioner, we want to try to get this right. Are you, you're saying 2 years from, including his voluntary non-hunting?
How about 2 years from today?
2 years from today, or 2 years from January 4th, which was when his formal suspension began?
Today's clean.
I think the correct starting point would be at minimum January 4th. All right?
Chairman Pribble, can I clarify? The letter went out January 4th. His suspension was effective January 15th through February 15th, 2017 through February 14th, 2022.
So February 15, 2017 is when the suspension began. So you're offering a motion for a 2-year suspension beginning January 15, 2017. Do I have a second?
February 15th.
Is it February or January?
February.
The suspension went into effect February 15th.
February 15.
correct.
I'm sorry for misstating, February 15. So 2-year suspension commencing February 15, 2017, and some condition of community service.
Personal promise to me, you will seek out hunter safety classes 2 years, and talk to the kids and tell them what you did.
Absolutely.
I think the statute
Let's
says
not,
there's
wait,
a
wait,
fine that
let's,
comes with it.
pardon?
So we can't just do that. I think the statute said there's
No,
you
that-
have to
he's
pay a
already-
fine. It's like $350 or something to be reinstated.
Well, if there's an administrative fee, I assume that goes with it, yeah.
It has
Yeah,
to.
we're not absolving from that, but that's, okay, so now we got 2-year suspension commencing February 15, 2017, community service, doing education, and whatever administrative fee that goes with the reinstatement process. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Wingfield. So we have a motion by Pizol, second by Wingfield. We'll take a.
Can we have discussion?
Sure, discussion, I'm sure. Absolutely, I'm sorry.
I'm getting the stink.
You know, we offered a lifeline, and quite frankly, I understand your travel plans. I totally get it. I live in the furthest corner of the state and have to travel a lot, and I really am sympathetic to that. I'm also sympathetic to small-town post office. I live in a little post office that was up for axe, and we finally petitioned our congressman. We got 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. So and I have certified mail come to me that I don't get to the post office every day. I understand. So the post office might be a little bit guilty here. I understand all that. My biggest problem is we've kind of offered you a lifeline to revisit the issue with our professionals, and I think they're open and honest. I don't think they're biased, and quite frankly, it dismays me that you declined that offer. And that's your call. That's your call.
And we really didn't know where we were coming to here today.
I understand.
We were a little confused, whether we were wanting a second hearing or an appeal, and we were told that we had to do an appeal. I mean, that's just the way it was.
Well, I understand.
This wasn't our first choice.
No, I understand, but
Wasn't our
we've,
first choice.
I think through our discussion, we're offering you a second chance
Okay.
at a hearing. But if I understood you correctly, you said no. You said, so,
No, we didn't. We didn't say no. I'm confused as you are here with, I mean,
So
Steve
this-
would be the hearing officer again?
Correct.
he's
Okay.
our man.
Correct.
Okay.
So just in terms of parliamentary procedure, and I invite the discussion from everybody here. The commission can consider, Mr. Bray, as you well know, more than one motion here. If the Pizol motion were to fail, there could be a subsequent motion
Exactly.
to offer
I understand that. I didn't know
a new-
if they
a hearing. And, I mean, I just want to make sure that that's understood. Any other discussion on the Pizol motion? Again, 2-year suspension commencing February 15, community service, and then whatever appropriate administrative fines. Okay, no more discussion, then we'll have a roll call vote. Clerk, please call the roll.
Gray?
No.
Horn?
No.
Howard?
No.
Heisel?
Yes.
Vihil?
No.
Wingfield?
Yes.
Zimmerman?
No.
Zip?
No.
That was a good one.
Pribble?
I'm voting for the
Chairman
Peisel,
Pribble.
I'm voting for the Peisel motion. I guess that's a yes.
Motion failed.
Okay, so the motion for the two-year suspension fails. So the Chair would entertain any other motion. Mr. Bray?
I would make a motion that we offer these folks a re-examination with our hearing examiner at whatever schedule they determine is correct.
Second by Vihil?
Yes.
Okay, so motion by Bray, second by Vihil for, it's not a rehearing, it's, because they never had a hearing in the
Okay,
first
they're
place.
hearing.
So a hearing.
So it is, it's a
Oh, is it a rehearing? Is it considered?
Not tainted by us standing here today.
You're not helping yourself right now.
Anyway, I hope everybody's open-minded.
Okay, any discussion on the Bray motion for a rehearing, granting a rehearing? Mr. Howard?
I just want to make clear on the record that I appreciate what staff's done. I think staff technically did comply with the statute. I'm going to vote for this motion, but I don't want there to be any input that we don't appreciate what staff's done and that they did anything wrong. And I have every confidence that they'll get a fair hearing. So I appreciate it.
I think we can blame the post office.
Okay.
Given the, given how Western Colorado likes to vilify the federal government for most anything, this is the one place you can blame the post office and not find anybody argue with you.
We're from a town of 300 people in
Right.
Iowa also, I understand.
All right, so we have the motion for granting the rehearing, obviously without prejudice. And by the way, you still, I assume, still maintains a right to appeal whatever decision comes out of the rehearing, correct, if they should choose?
I would assume so, without, Tim here today to kind of weigh in on that, but being a rehearing is to be treated as a first go-through on this, and I would assume he'd have full rights of appeal.
Got it. So any further discussion? So Chair wishes to offer opinion. I too am impressed by your remorse and your honesty. I'm one of those who, by the way, grew up, I don't know, where in Iowa are you from?
Templeton, Iowa.
Templeton.
Home of Templeton Rye.
Absolutely. Have sampled it myself.
Where it's from.
Perhaps underage, which therefore admitting to youthful mistakes myself. But we have, as others have said here, get a lot of appeals from folks who are, who not only don't demonstrate any remorse, they deliberately try to evade or hide or cover up or run from whatever they did. And that does not at all appear to be the case. So I'm very sympathetic to the motion. So with that, it'll be a roll call vote. Clerk will call the roll. This is a yes vote to grant the rehearing.
Bray?
Yes.
Horn?
No.
Howard?
Yes.
Heisel?
Yes.
Vihil?
Yes.
Wingfield?
Yes.
Zimmerman?
No.
Zip?
Yes.
And Chairman Pribble.
Yes.
Motion carries.
So motion carries. Rehearing granted. You retain whatever your other appeal rights subsequently. And so that takes care of this issue. Mr. Cooley?
Appreciate your honesty. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, little time management commission. It is time to adjourn, but we're going to continue on. We have the simple and edifying topic of commission policy on resident, non-resident license allocation, which I've got to confess is got to be one of the most complex and confusing. And if there's some capability on the part of Mr. Chick to simplify this, I'd be great. Now, I've got to ask the indulgence of the commission I need a 5-minute bio break myself, so I'd prefer you give me 5 minutes or less, whatever it takes to get to go to the run. Well, I want to hear what he's got to say. I want to learn. I'm going to go quickly. So we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
for this case, we can't do it for you.
I just don't, I mean, I do believe in redemption, and this was legitimate remorse, and kid's a youngster, and, you know, variety of things, and, you know, and I'm not one to quibble on details, like both Jim and even Michelle. I was just frustrated because they didn't, the offer when it was so obvious. I said, well, you know what, Michelle, some people aren't as smart as you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's roll. It's getting to be 1 here on a Friday afternoon. The walleyes are spawning in somewhere in Minnesota, Ontario, the Mississippi River. But here in Colorado, they're an invasive species. I'm just always mystified. But Mr. Zip's going to teach me about that someday. All right, Corey Chick, this is a great topic, and I'm pleased. This is going to be an informational item, and let's roll. Let's get everybody educated.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commission Director Corey Chick, Licensing Section Manager. I'm here to give a brief presentation of the draw process and resident, non-resident allocation. This presentation gives a good overall picture of kind of the order that things fall. The first order of the draw is to take care of the landowner preference. Excuse me, Corey. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry.
Dale must have traded his microphone with you.
Sorry, the first order of the draw is to take care of the landowner preference. Up to 20% of the quota west of I-25 and 25% of the, I'm sorry, 20% of the quota west of I-25 and 25% of the quota east of I-25. Second, 15% of limited licenses for doe pronghorn, antlerless, and either sex deer and antlerless elk quota is drawn for youth hunters. It is at this point where we start keeping track of the non-resident allocation cap. Landowners are not counted against the cap since we do not know how the vouchers will be issued, but basically a 50-50 resident, non-resident split once redeemed based on recent data. Third, we complete the regular draw process, still keeping track of the cap. And then finally, the hybrid draw, again, still keeping track of the non-resident cap. I also want to remind you that the current draw is a soft cap. It only takes into account the first choice, and it isn't a guarantee for non-residents. To illustrate the current process and give you, and order the draw, I'd like to give you some examples. In this example of the regular draw process where non-resident cap has been met, this hunt code has a quota of 27. That means that 4 licenses will go to landowners and the remaining 23 will go in the regular draw. This unit is also...
Could you say that again? You can speak a little more loudly.
Sure. 27. That means that 4 licenses will go to landowners and that the remaining 23 will be in the regular draw. This percent of 23 is 4.6, and we always round down for calculations. You can see the first 4 licenses have been awarded to non-residents. The first applicant had 24 points. There were no resident or non-resident points equal to or greater than 24 that applied for this hunt code. The next 3 had 22, and their application numbers inverted and converted to be low numbers. Next, you will see that we skipped non-residents even though they had 22 points and low converted application numbers because the cap had been met. Here you'll see that we had a resident pop up, but we had to skip them because he was grouped, or they were grouped with a non-resident. You'll see that under where it says GCAP. So that was a group cap out, is what that was. Then you'll see here, we finally get to a resident that has 21 points and a low application number. And then from there, we just work our way down it until we fill all the quota. Next, we have the hybrid draw. 20% of the regular draw licenses are allocated for hybrid draw. In those hunt codes that require 10 or more resident points to draw based on a 3-year average ending in 2009. Anyone with 5 or greater points can be included if they choose to participate in this draw. They are sorted. They are sorted by their converted application number, lowest to highest. If they drew in the regular draw, they will be skipped as you see here. And in this one, you can see where it says W out, they drew in the regular draw and then would have been skipped in the hybrid. The next example, I'd like to show you an example where there is less resident demand. There are 85 first-choice resident applicants, 150 non-resident applicants, and the quota is 225. This is a 65-35 split unit, which means the non-resident cap would be up to 78 licenses. Sorry. Sorry, I just lost my place for a second. You can see here, or you can see there that non-resident, or that high non-resident demand and a lot of successful non-residents. We are continuing with this hunt code, and this slide illustrates how the draw works when we have less resident demand. Those with asterisks represent non-resident that were initially skipped because the cap had been met, and then were picked up later because we had satisfied resident demand. So to give a little bit of history, back in 2000 is when this non-resident resident allocation come into play. At that time, the director appointed a committee of 15 stakeholders who met several times over a 5-month period. After taking consideration the recommendations of stakeholders groups and the extensive public comment, the Division of Wildlife staff presented a proposal to the Wildlife Commission that led to the policy contained here within the Policy Commission. In 2010, we had a policy amendment that changed the 60-40 allocation from 2000 to 65-35 and also added in the 80-20. Since then, this has been a topic that has come up numerous times, and that has been reaffirmed a couple times by the commission since that date. Any questions?
Commission questions?
Not necessarily a question, but the soft cap, hard cap, I was on the commission when, okay. Back up a little bit. The 2000 stakeholder process, I participated in that. And we brought back to the commission a 60-40 recommendation. And that was adopted. In 2005, the 65-35, 80-20, I was on the commission at that point. And it was very contentious and lots of discussion. We went through it. We finally voted on it in Salida. And quite frankly, it took kind of like the last agenda item. It took about 3 motions to finally get one passed because we were a split commission. But it eventually passed 6-5 to do the 65, 35, 80, 20. And I believe there's some other commission members here in the audience that can testify and back me up on this, but we thought we were voting for a hard cap. Understanding it was just on first choice, not straight through, not just first choice. And subsequently through, I don't know how, quite frankly, through staff internal process, I don't even know who the players were, but that's where we came up with the soft cap situation that we have. And that's how it became implemented. And that's wasn't the intent of the vote at that point. And then the hard cap was, at least in my mind, and I believe I can be backed up by testimony, that we thought 65, if you had a fully subscribed 100 licenses in a hunt code first choice, that's just first choice, not straight through. 65 of those were going to go to residents and 35 were going to go to non-residents, and that if you were fully subscribed, if you were undersubscribed on either side of the equation, the leftover or the other group could get it. But that's not where we are today. That's not what's happening. And can you speak to that, Corey?
As far as what the commission was feeling at the time, or?
As to what's occurring today with the soft cap.
Currently today, with the soft cap, it again is a 65-35 split. So basically what will happen is we will start the draw process. It'll be based off of points, and as it works down, there is no advantage. I guess what you're asking is to the non-resident. So in other words, if they don't have enough in the draw that have the points, then that quota would go to non-residents.
Is it a fact or not a fact that a resident will, with less points, will draw over a non-resident with more points under the current system in some cases?
Can you speak up?
It can happen in some, it does happen in some circumstances, yes, that's correct.
Can you repeat that question? I'm not sure.
Question
Actually,
was-
vice versa as well.
Yeah, vice versa. In any given hunt code, if a non-resident has more preference points than a resident still may draw the license over when the cap hasn't been met. That's the soft cap situation. And it's costing the division a lot of money. I mean, quite frankly, we're here, everybody's emotions are raw over yesterday's decision, and I think everybody needs time to decompress and sort their thoughts. But this is one place we can help ourselves, is this isn't a legislative matter. It was proposed at one point to be a legislative matter, and I'm glad it's not. I don't think we want this in control of the legislature. This is a policy that this commission has full control over, and it's a tweak. It's not a change in allocation. We're still honoring the 65, 35, 80, 20. It just is a guarantee that those licenses are going 65, 35, and 80, 20 on first choice. If there's insufficient demand, then the other side, on either side, if there's not enough non-residents applying, then they go to residents, or vice versa. That's the difference between a soft cap and a hard cap. And it's a confusing issue, but it's not. I know a lot of people are out there saying, well, you're changing the allocation. No, we are not changing the allocation, or proposing to change the allocation. No, we're not proposing to change that. We're proposing to draw a straight draw.
To draw what? I'm sorry.
Straight draw.
straight. I mean, or hard cap, whatever you want to call it. I mean, terminology here gets a little fuzzy. But
Mr. Zip, or Mr. Howard, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand, we're not acting today, we're talking.
Yeah, this information.
So I want to make a comment or two just on the public input that I've gotten. And then I'm going to, if we are going to go forward, I have some things that I personally would like to know better about and would ask if we are going to go forward and consider a change, that CPW get back to us on it. I got more calls about this than any other thing since I've been on the commission. And that's right after I got more calls about the RFP program than any other thing that I had gotten since I've been on the commission. So I am concerned that this splits the sportsman's community. The public hunters that called me, were very strong and emotional about it. And then I know, obviously, the outfitting community is very strong about it as well, and I understand that. And I think those are both legitimate concerns. But I just point out that if we open this up in a narrow way or a wide way, either way, we're going to split a constituency that I think the directors just told us was very united down at the Capitol. So I just ask us to think about that. I think there's a lot of issues here that I would like, as a relatively new member to know about. I'd also like to just make another plea. I keep doing this for my constituency to feel free to call me and email me and let me know what you think. It's very helpful. I followed up the calls I got by reaching out to some folks, and I got different opinions. So, and there's some issues here about that I'd like to understand better about oversubscribed versus undersubscribed. I'd also like to understand how much revenue. I understand the point Commissioner Bray is making, but I'd like, if we're going to make an extra $5,000, I'm not certain that makes much difference. If we're going to make an extra $1 million, well, that's a significant number. So I'd like to know that, and I know from talking to staff that that's not an easy calculation because you have to make assumptions, but I'm certain you can make some guesstimates and tell us about the assumptions. Let's see, bad eyes. I'd like to know how many licenses would shift from residents to non-residents, because it's a very emotional discussion, and I'd really like to get the data so we can kind of put the emotion to the side and at least look at the data on that. Then, and I, Commissioner Bray may be able to correct me on this. Some people brought up with me that there's a moratorium on some of the 3565 units moving to 2080 units that was agreed at some point in the commission process, and I'd like to understand that better, and whether, and what I'd be thinking about is if we went to a hard cap, should some of those 3565 units be thought about going into the 80/20? And so that's just a general explanation that would help me. And then I just would beg for more public input, because I think that's really what we need if we're going to make a change of any kind. So, thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
Well said, Mr. Howard. Other comments, questions? Well, I would strongly concur with what Mr. Howard said about we need to, this is obviously a very sensitive discussion. I'm not inclined to do anything that precipitatively, nor do I think the majority of the commission is. The first step is getting everybody on a common ground of knowledge and understanding. So I think you've just got an outline of a series of questions that you need to figure out how to answer and present on at a subsequent meeting.
Sure. So
that it's more understandable. Ever since I've first been exposed to this, I thought this has got to be somebody's, something that evolved over generations that has gotten to be so confusing and frustrating for the customer base that it's just got people tearing their hair out, or what's left of their hair out. And I wish we could wave a wand, take it to the advanced math unit, I guess it'd actually be in statistics at the university, at one of our great universities, and say, here's the question. Can you design a simpler process? Because I bet there's a simpler one out there, but that may not happen in my lifetime. So I think all commissioners should voice their questions or suggestions to Mr. Chick about subsequent presentation. And we can continue this discussion. And plus, I totally affirm what Mr. Howard said about inviting public input, especially as it changes the allocation balance, if in fact it does so, between resident and non-resident hunters. Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, that public input process, is that something to consider? Is that in the commission meeting, like at a future meeting, or is that something the commission wants staff to go out and meet, like in 2005 in that working group? Just want to clarify.
Well, I'm open to any suggestion. It can be like a study session. It can be through your sportsman roundtables, which you have sort of annual meetings or quarterly meetings. I'm open to suggestion. But this has obviously been an issue that's plagued this commission, both in its current and previous iterations, going back now 17 years at minimum. So we had to bite the bullet and figure it out one way or the other. Or maybe it's not a zero-sum, that's my hope, is it's not a zero-sum game where, there's some winners and some losers between resident and non-resident hunting customers. Mr. Zip, you had a question?
Well, just as far as feedback from the public, I think hopefully with iPause, we'll be able to stay connected and communicate, facilitate communication both ways with the public. And I know we're a little ways off on that, but I think public meetings are great, but we really also need to look at best available techniques utilizing today's technology of reaching high numbers of our user base. And public meetings really seem to only sample a small portion. So just general recommendation until, iPause is finished, or even, once it is, really trying to utilize technology as best we can. And I certainly am not a tech guru, so I'm putting that challenge to staff that are more tech savvy, to really, utilize those more efficient means to reach higher numbers of our constituents, so that we know what they're, we have an idea of what they want, and they feel like, they've been heard. So.
Sure. So I'd like to ask a question of the director. We can't be the only state in the union struggling with this kind of question. And so if you check with your friends at AFWA, the National Association, or the Regional Association, WAFA, let's get into best practices, see what other states are doing. Does everybody have a system that's so complicated?
No.
Okay.
Mostly in the West. I mean, it's supply and demand, we can lay it out. It's apples and oranges when you, to some extent, when you talk preference points versus bonus points and all of that. So, but we can give you a good smattering.
Please do, Mr. Bray.
I would like to ask from Corey and his staff to give us a synopsis over the last, since 2005, I guess.
Okay.
What it would look like, what the numbers would have been, both in terms of numbers of hunters and revenue versus the system we're using versus what it would have looked like if we'd had the hard cap. I would like that comparison. That would be very beneficial. To Commissioner Howard's point, it would show us the number of hunters, it would show us the revenue difference, and I think that would be valuable information. I would like to see that in a subsequent follow-up.
Any other commissioner want to give Corey any more assignment, questions, ideas, burden? If not, we're going to go to public comment. We've got 4 or 5 people who signed up. I think in order that I received them, Susan Mixell, if you're here, come on up, Susan. And then followed by Steve Belinda will be next, followed by Dick Ray, and followed by Denny Behrens. So, Susan.
Hi, my name is Susan Meixel. I'm a rancher, outfitter, landowner, public servant. Anyway, I want to thank you first for addressing this issue because it is very complicated. And I can see your eyes when they go soft cap, hard cap, and all of this stuff. It's confusing. But in simple terms, when they voted on the 65-35, it was the assumption that they would draw the non-residents first up to their 35%. And then they would draw the they were going to draw the non-residents first, and then they would do the resident hunters. Excuse me, I'm confusing myself. So what you were asking staff to do, I kind of did on my own a couple years ago, and looked at the data from 2003 through 2014. And what I did was I took the numbers that were on your website and figured out how many licenses were allocated that year for deer, elk, and how many resident hunters versus how many non-resident hunter licenses were issued. In 2014, after taking out the landowner cap and all that kind of stuff, there were I'm looking at mule deer, there were 65,898 deer licenses issued. Of those, 53,000, almost 54,000, were given to the resident hunters, which meant 82% of those licenses went to the resident hunters, and only 18% went to the non-resident because of the way it was drawn. Going down with those same numbers of 898 licenses that were issued, if there were 35% were issued to the non-resident, there would have been 23,600 non-resident licenses issued compared to the 11,910 issues that were issued to the non-residents. So in calculating the difference between what a non-resident was paying for his elk license or deer license compared to what the resident hunter was paying for his deer license, there was a difference of over $2 million on deer licenses only for that was over 12 years, it averaged $2,303,000. Now, I realize that was a concept because I didn't allow for second choice, third choice, because your data doesn't show that. But just conceptually, you lost over $2,300,000 or $303,000 over on an average for 12 years. You did the same thing on elk licenses. And so over the 12 years, by doing the draw the way you were doing it, you had a potential loss of $4 million a year just because of the way the licenses were drawn.
Okay. Susan, I don't want to, cut you short, but
Oh,
we're
I
kind of,
understand.
the 3 minutes. Could you identify the organization you represent?
Well,
if any?
I'm on the board of the Colorado Outfitters Association.
Right.
But this was
I
something
want
that.
I just want that on the record.
Right.
And
But-
you're welcome to share your research with Corey.
Yeah.
Go down the road,
Yeah, that would be fine.
okay?
Okay, but anyway, I was trying to explain to you, because it's easy to get glassy-eyed with all the figures and the terminology but that's
Right.
the nuts and bolts.
I just offer my editorial comment. If our sole function was to maximize revenue, then we'd award 100% to the non-resident community.
Well, right, and
So
and
you got to find the right balance.
And I agree, and when the commission voted for 65-35, that was exactly what they thought was going to happen, was that 35% of the licenses would go to the non-residents. Knowing that there was going to be a great financial impact had you done it any differently. And this is something that you guys can do without having to wait for a bill from legislature to do it. And while the public hunters are, there's a wide diversity of opinion there, I have yet to see those groups bring to you a way that you can stay, in business by not doing that. You've done the 80-20, the 65-35 soft caps for all of these years, and you're now way in the hole. So I would like to have you just consider possibly going to the hard cap, do the 35% non-resident draw first, and see what it does to your bottom line. It can't be any worse than what you're already doing.
And that's part of the calculation that we've asked Corey to research and come up with.
And so that's all I'm asking for, is for you to consider another option.
Good.
Okay?
Very good, thank you much.
You're welcome.
I made a slight error, but I'm going to go ahead and hear Mr. Belinda. He's listed, I didn't notice that it says general comment rather than.
Defer, Chairman, until the comments on this are over.
All right, well, that's very gracious of you, Steve. So let's go to Dick Ray and Denny Behrens, and then lastly, Chris Journey. And Mr. Ray, welcome back. You're a welcome sight to be.
I don't know about that, but thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. It is good to be back among the commission and among my own kind, so to speak. Comments more than anything. Go back to 2002 Montrose, Colorado Wildlife Commission meeting. At that point in time, 44% of the licenses for elk were going to non-residents, just as the chips fell. There was no allocation. The decision was made there at that commission meeting to come up with a 60-40 split, and that was okay. And then in Salida, just as Commissioner Bray has outlined for you, in 2005, many local residents wanted more, so the 65-35 concept was implemented. I was on the commission at that time. And just as you are now, the important thing, of course, with you as commissioners, is policy and regulation and budget. Budget. Robert Bray and I, Commissioner Robert Bray and I had this discussion that at 65-35 split, if it was a hard cap and if those numbers held up, the budget would be sustained. And as it's been said earlier, it was assumed, not only assumed, in fact, I asked Mr. Monaghan's, were we voting on up to 35%? Because in that case, it could be zero for the non-resident. And I don't really care that much about residents and non-residents. I'm a resident, my kids are resident, my grandkids are resident. But fairness and revenue, budget, that was extremely important. What we were looking for as the intent of the 65-35, preserve the non-resident stream of revenue that was generated by deer and elk hunters, and a realistic allocation process that resulted in that preservation. That was the intent of all the commission and the director, and it was obvious that's what we wanted. Now then, we see a convoluted evolution to what we have today. How it came about, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Where we go from here is extremely important, and how we get there. I look forward to being possibly part of future discussions along this lines. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we can do it by leaps and bounds. That's all I have. Thank you.
Excellent, well said. Denny Behrens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the commission. My name is Danny Behrens, and I'm with the Big Game Forever. And I would like to respond to some of Commissioner Howard's questions. And this is based off of the report that the commission puts out, or the CPW puts out. We took last year's data, and this is the numbers I'm giving you are the discrepancy for an up to draw versus on elk and deer, okay? So last year, there were 2,509 non-residents that should have drew if the hard cap was in place. You extrapolate that out, and you're looking at $1,605,760. If you do the same thing for deer, there were 2,472 in that discrepancy last year. That's 9,600, excuse me, 90,790, excuse me. You add that up, and that's a considerable amount of money. And I'll guarantee you, as a businessman, if I had that money, I wouldn't worry about me and Ron Velarde fighting over moose tags. I'd be in Alaska every year killing my moose. That financial stuff that took place back in 2005 is recorded. And there is documentation within the minutes of your commission meetings that Mike King said he changed it. Now, my question to you, because we don't have an attorney right here right now, is your commission vote valid in the state of Colorado, or does that director have the ability, the authority to change it? You need to ask that question. I'll guarantee you, if I was on this commission, damn right I'd be asking that question, because somebody needs to know. Us as sportsmen have a right to know. I'm not mad at you people. I'm mad at the system that happened back then. And because of it, if you extrapolate just on an average out from what happened last year, you lost $28 million in 11 years. How do you do that, folks? And I don't care if you're a resident or a non-resident. How do we throw money away when we're supposed to be managing our wildlife? I'll guarantee you, I wish I had $28 million today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chris Journey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. And as you've known from the past, we've spoken extensively on this subject and topic, and it is a very broad topic as far as dynamics within that. It basically comes down to a supply and demand issue. And one of the factors we need to consider in the future, and when we're moving into this, is that Colorado has a growing population. We all know that. So with the demand for the limited licenses, as we've seen, you know, personally being myself as a native resident, I've seen a lot of changes over the years and to those. And with more people coming into the system, it puts more demand on that kind of limited licenses. So at some point, the resident demand will far outweigh any non-resident opportunity. And if those dynamics continue to exist and you continue with the changes over time, the non-residents will be out by default. There'll be too many residents to support it. So today's scenario, the non-residents continue to support the majority of the budget. And so that's reality. You know, that's not a fantasy in any way, shape, or form. So it comes down to a question of what is tolerant and allowable for the non-residents to have. I mean, they continue to interject money every year. And when you look at the numbers of the hunters that continue to apply here, we have an increase, you know. So the recruitment aspect is there. It all comes back to the supply. So making sure we have that abundant supply, making sure we have different management opportunities that exist for a potential to alleviate some of the points creep and whatnot, things I believe we should be working on. You know, and you look at the non-residents, it's always been said that it's a cash cow. Well, if you have a milk cow and you continue to feed it poor or moldy hay, but you continue to milk it as far as you can, then you're not going to get much out of it. So if you want a good quality cow and a product that comes out of it, you got to feed it grain and you got to feed it good hay. So I translate that in some of the premium tags as well. Because come November, just because this fee bill didn't pass, the non-residents are still going to see their increase. And it was a whole heck of a lot more than what the residents were willing to contribute. So I think that's a pretty strong message when it whittled its way down to what they were willing to contribute into the whole system. So I think it says a lot.
Good, thank you.
It's avenues we need to look at.
Chris, would you, maybe you did and I missed it, but would you identify if you're representing an organization?
Yeah, just Chris Journey Outfitter.
Just as an outfitter yourself? No, okay, thank you. Okay, that concludes our public comment. Now we'll take Steve Belinda, who's commenting on a different issue.
Thank you, Chairman Pribble, Director Brochard, and members of the commission. Just wanted to give you an update introduction of an organization that I run as another part of what I do, wearing many hats. It's called the North American Grouse Partnership. And with approval, Chairman, I'd like to hand out just a short summary and some window decals.
Please.
So the North American Grouse Partnership, we're a small nonprofit that advocates for all 12 species of North American grouse. You're very fortunate in Colorado. You have 8 of those 12 species. I think there's 1 or 2 other states that might have 9. So we look forward to working with the department and the commission on grouse-related issues, and thank you for the quality job you've done on those species in the past, Gunnison sage grouse, greater sage grouse, and of course we're really excited about the rough grouse reintroduction to the Grand Mesa area. We think that the relationship between the birds, the landscapes, and our human interaction with them is something that's extremely important to landscape level conservation. We advocate for science and professional management to drive decisions being about grouse and grouse habitat. And finally, we offer our expertise and other management skill sets to partners who are doing grouse conservation. Now, we're a little bit different than other organizations. We don't have chapters. We don't try to raise money from the traditional chapter model. And what we try to do is be a catalyst for increased grouse conservation by bringing that science, policy, expertise, and awareness to those species. We're also very excited about the ptarmigan research that's beginning in Colorado through Professor Aldridge at CSU, and we just wanted to let you know that we're here as a resource. So as you contemplate grouse and grouse-related issues, please feel free to call on us if you have questions, need help, or other information about grouse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Any questions at all? Okay. All right, gentle people, friends and neighbors, we are at nearly the magic hour. The consent agenda. So, you have a list of the consent agenda. Item 27 including game damage claims, real estate issues identification, and a couple appointments to the Habitat Partnership Program Committee. Does anyone wish to offer a motion to approve? Wingfield moves. Zimmerman seconds. This will be a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. With that, unless there's any remaining commissioner questions, we declare this meeting adjourned.
Sounded like a broken bat.
Did, didn't it?